with him. That is a really huge pill to swallow. This was not an easy day for you.
Miss Ewan, do you know who her father is?
Yeah, I do.
And it's
His brother.
Mr. Hawkins' brother?
Whoa. Didn't see that coming.
So you were sleeping with him and his brother
He
at
was
the
gone.
same time?
No, not at the same time. He was gone. He was out to sea.
The details of this case was good enough to write a blockbuster movie. Ms. Jackson had turned to the courts to prove that her ex sired her adult daughter. Why did it take so long? Her daughter was almost 3 decades old, and to thicken the plot, Mr. Brown's wife was in court with him as a defendant. This was going to be one messy plot.
Ms. Jackson, you've dragged your ex-boyfriend to court to prove he fathered your 26-year-old daughter, Tanika.
Yes, Your Honor.
You claim he's denied her since birth because you were caught in a love triangle with him and his wife.
That's a lie, Your
Yes,
Honor.
Your Honor.
The gag is, according to Ms. Jackson back then, when she dated Mr. Brown, they were tangled in a love triangle with the other party being his wife. The child's paternity had been called into question since her birth, and apparently, Mr. Brown was positing that he wasn't the father, and his reason might have been valid. The details of how they met had everyone shocked.
1 week ago, you reopened your child support case in which you state Mr. Brown owes you $20,624.08.
That's
Yes,
a lie.
Your Honor.
That's a lie, Your Honor.
Surprisingly, the daughter in question had been told her whole life that Mr. Brown was her father. But Mr. Brown and his wife held contrary views. Not to be outdone with getting her piece said in court, Mr. Brown's wife, on the other hand, did not forget to seize whatever opportunity she had to remind everyone Mr. Brown didn't want Ms. Jackson. One would think the affair might have proven otherwise, but surely Mrs. Brown knew better.
That
Yes,
is
Your
not
Honor.
true,
Ms.
Your
Jackson.
Honor.
Yes.
That is not
My
true.
daughter and my son.
Ms.
I
Brown,
can take care of.
your entire life you were told that Mr. Brown was your biological father?
Yes, Your Honor, I was. Well, by Mr. and Mrs. Brown, they told me different stories that he might not be my father, but my mother always told me that.
It turns out this ill-fated relationship had been built on lies and deceit. Unsurprisingly, it started in the club with a euphoric ambience sprinkled with sugary words, spiced with the right kind of lies. Everyone knows what they say about finding love in the club. This was not a rom-com story.
My
I
husband don't want
I
her.
met him at the club, Your Honor.
The club.
I met him at the club, and we started talking, we started dancing. He told me he'll be back, and when he left with his wife, Miss Brown. I asked him who she was. He told me if she was just a friend. So he came back to the club.
That night?
That night. We danced, we partied, and then we went to the apartment.
Ms. Jackson drops a bomb in court during her testimony. Mrs. Brown had seen them sneaking around. She may or may not have taken in the scene well. It didn't end there. She might have also seen them bumping their ugly bits in the closet. This story had too many plot thickeners.
So I jumped on him. I let her leave. She walked out. After that, this was some months later, when I got to my apartment, I unlocked the door with the key. So at that point, I had sliding walk-in closets. I heard my closet door slide open.
You could hear it.
Yes, ma'am.
Not to be defeated in his quest to be two-timer of the year, Mr. Brown started shuffling between the two women, quite literally moving between cities. The illicit lovers also suffered loss together, but another trip to the obstetrician soon provided them with good news. Or was it?
Oh,
So
yeah.
were you all married at this time?
Me and Mr. Brown had been together for about 3 or 4 years when he started messing with her.
I want to go back to the point where you realized you're pregnant.
We had moved. We moved to Albany, Georgia. Back and forth, he was telling me that he had to come to Jacksonville to take care of business, which wasn't no business, it was being with her.
Exactly right.
And then he
Exactly
came
right.
back one time. I told him that I had a miscarriage.
Ooh, things were getting spicier. Despite getting down with Ms. Jackson without protection and a subsequent trip to the doctor, Mr. Brown wasn't about to believe the child Ms. Jackson was carrying was his, especially since he had seen her creeping around with strange bedfellows.
So you went together. Mr. Brown, do you remember going with her to the clinic?
No, Your Honor, I don't.
Do you remember being in a relationship with both of them at the same time, back and forth?
Yes, Your Honor.
You do. Were you sleeping with both of them without protection?
Yes, Your Honor.
So why do you deny that Tanika is your daughter if you know you've been with this woman over a span of time?
Well, Your Honor, I've seen too many things happen. Like one morning,
Mr. Brown clarifies that cohabitation had taken place, and that made him expect a level of exclusivity. Ms. Brown has an outburst in court, and Mrs. Brown reiterates her assertion that Mr. Brown was with her at the time of conception of Ms. Jackson's daughter. Ms. Brown just wanted the truth. Not to be deterred, the three older adults argue about timelines and old link-ups.
Yes, we was kind of like staying together.
Oh, so at that point, you and Ms. Jackson were living together?
Yeah, we was staying together.
Okay.
This is what I'm tired of going through. This is not
And then the
about their
time she
relationship.
supposed to have conceived.
I don't care nothing
What she said at the time she supposed to
what
have
they
conceived
had going on.
Tanika,
This is not
he
about
was in
them
Jacksonville
two.
with me.
This is about me. This is about me finding the DNA test, not them.
To thicken the plot, Ms. Jackson seemed to avoid the subject anytime the Brown couple talked about getting a DNA test. This was not only suspicious, but exhausting for everyone involved. Nevertheless, Mr. Brown was excited about having a kid and did everything a dad would do, but he still wasn't listed as her father in important legal papers. Why?
But instead, she was born 3 months earlier. And every time, Your Honor, we asked her for a paternity test, she get mad.
Why do you think she's avoiding the test?
Because she know that's not his daughter.
At the point you find out you pregnant,
Yes, Your Honor.
you tell him.
Yes.
You guys go together.
Yes, Your Honor.
From that point on, was he acting like Tanika was his child?
Yes, Your
Was he
Honor.
excited?
In an interesting turn of events, Mrs. Brown's husband drops another bombshell in court, alleging that Ms. Jackson wasn't very single herself at the time she was creeping around with Mr. Brown. The person who signed Ms. Jackson's daughter's certificate is revealed by Mr. Brown's wife, and everybody is left flustered by the revelation. More shocking facts were exposed, and it was jaw-dropping to say the least.
Miss Jackson was married at the time.
Wait a minute now, Miss Jackson. When did you get married in there?
She was married all the
She was
time.
married.
When she was messing with him.
Your Honor, I got married, but I got it.
She
my
was
husband
still
got it
married.
alone because he went to Georgia and got married to another
They
woman.
put the other
which
man's
the judge
name on the
said
birth
that was
certificate.
bigamy.
Her husband's name
He
was on
said
her
when
birth
we was
certificate.
going together, he know because at that time we was seeing each other. We were seeing each other.
You
me
were
and
seeing Mr. Brown?
Yeah.
Could this story be any more dramatic? Mr. Brown reveals several botched attempts to get a DNA test done on Ms. Jackson's daughter spanning over a decade. So why did she want to do it now? Not to mention, Mr. Brown had also been paying child support. Mr. Brown's wife had a theory for why his mistress was avoiding the DNA test, and it was quite interesting.
I want to go to the board, Your Honor, and show you something from my maid.
Go ahead, ma'am.
Okay, the first time, it was 1990. I paid money to have a test done for her. She didn't show up. Again, the summer of 90. She don't, they keep calling me, that's an insult about DNA testing. Every time we ask her something. Same thing in 1992.
In a very interesting turn of events, Ms. Jackson reveals that Mr. Brown had legally acknowledged her daughter as his kid, and the judge went ahead to confirm this. Everyone involved had different versions of the truth, and it was time to find out what version was real and what wasn't. Will this story have a happy ending? What ending would be a happy ending?
Mr. Brown, you are her father.
Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Mama ain't got to laugh.
And you knew that. You knew that. Are you all right, Tanika? No, he need to come over there and hug her.
At all this.
Mr. Brown, that's your daughter. That's your daughter.
You forgive me.
I forgave you a long time ago, Dad.
The case of Manser-Sehr was the most heartbreaking story yet. Mr. Manser had spent 5 years in prison for unpaid child support wages for Ms. Sehr's son, and he was in court to confirm paternity of the child.
Mr. Manser, you claim you spent 5 years in prison for failing to pay child support for the defendant, Ms. Sehr's son, Dylan.
That's right.
And it was never proven that you are his biological father.
From neighbors to sexcapade partners and possibly parents, one thing was for certain. Mr. Manser and Ms. Sehr had an ill-fated relationship. The real question is, why exactly did things go from sour to oh so bitter between these two?
Now, Ms. Sehr, you say you have proof that Mr. Manser is Dylan's father. You argue you are here to prove again that he is the father of your son, to finally stop him running from his responsibility.
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Manser, explain to the court the circumstances surrounding your arrest.
Well, Your Honor, I'm here to explain that 12 hours of my life cost me 5 years in the Department of Corrections.
A very jobless Mr. Manser had been served notice of a suit. It was the first time he had known he could have fathered a child somewhere, but alas, he wouldn't see freedom again until years later for unpaid child support. If he didn't know he had a kid, why was he sent to jail for a kid he had just known existed through court papers? He now wanted to know if the child he served jail term for was truly his.
And so
And
you
you did
showed
that,
up
huh?
for court, and what
No,
happened?
I wasn't
No, he
able
didn't
to. I
show
wasn't
up.
able to show up for court. I was completely on the other side of the state. I was indigent. I was living at my mom's. Didn't have a job at the time, so I didn't show up for court. And I was named the natural father by default.
And then what happened?
And then I was charged criminally for not paying the child support that was ordered in the default judgment.
Mr. Manser was clearly depressed. He had paid 5 years for a crime because he missed a court date. In his opinion, it was unfair, but the judge thought differently. Was she right? Ms. Sehr, on the other hand, couldn't care any less. She seemed to feel she lacked any sort of liability in what had happened to Mr. Manser. Did he deserve such punishment, though?
You didn't pay child support for about 8 years. Quit telling him it's 3 years. It was about 8
The,
years.
the court order was 1995. I got arrested in 1998, so that's 3 years in my calculation. 12 years. And then I went to prison for 5 years. When I got out of prison in 2003, I paid child support from that day until just February of last year when I lost
Only
my job.
because they garnished your wages.
Absolutely, that's what they do.
Meanwhile, the judge dropped some nuggets for hooking up for young adults. The law is above everybody else. His decision to miss a court date had designated him a default position as Ms. Sier's baby father, even if he may not have been. Cruel as it felt, Mr. Manser concurred to the judge's admonishments, and it was the right thing to do, or the wiser thing to do.
That goes to Florida on spring break and hooks up with a girl, and the girl goes to Texas, and the boy goes back to Massachusetts, and there's a petition to show up.
Yes!
If he can't fly from Massachusetts to Texas, he's automatically the natural father.
He better find
Well,
a
there's
way.
gonna be a lot
And
of people in prison.
listen. The pain that you've endured and what you've gone through is in part because
My stubbornness.
Mr. Manser, not to be intimidated, kept insisting the child wasn't his, even when he had been sentenced to. And years later, his stance had not changed. According to the presiding judge, this was the stuff movies are made of. Ms. Sehr, on the other hand, insists she has undeniable evidence to prove he was her son's father. But Mr. Manser wasn't buying it for 1 second. Here's why.
you are a living example of
Right.
that.
And it needs to be
So
known
now,
out
as
there.
you're being hauled off to court, you're still adamant and you're saying, I'm not the father of this child.
I'm saying I've never been proven to be the father of this child. I hadn't met him until he was like 15 years after I initiated contact for my son Chris. I wanted.
So wait,
But I
now
paid-
are you
I paid the ultimate
convinced he
price
is the
for that
father?
possibility.
Yes, ma'am.
Considering Ms. Sier's evidence lacked merit, the court had come to save the day by sharing the results of the independent DNA test it conducted. Ms. Sehr and Mr. Manser get into a row, and the judge calls a new witness to the stand to clear the tense air.
Now, this court has administered new testing, and both of you submitted to the test.
And it was.
Is that correct?
And it was very thorough. There was
And
initially.
is that correct, Ms. Sear?
Yes.
It's gonna be
And
quite
we will
different than what she's
reveal
presented.
those results shortly.
You think our DNA changed in 20 years?
No, I think the chain of custody's changed. I think.
Okay.
Your Honor, wouldn't most women want to shove that piece of paper in my face?
Mr. Manser's son discuss his upbringing with his dad and brothers. Dylan, Ms. Sier's son, whose paternity Mr. Manser was questioning, is brought into court, and he describes the relationship with his father. It's a tense day in court for the parties involved as the judge reads out the test results. This was the most shocking one yet.
Mr. Manser, you are not
Oh, God.
his father.
Oh, man. 5 years in prison. Dylan, I'm sorry, bro. This is why. This is why I did what I did.
But this
and
is
acted-
nothing I made up. The lab did
You
it.
made it all up. You
No,
made
I
those-
did not.
Well, those results
I
apparently
don't
are
know
made
any
up.
of those people on that form.
Oh, my God.
This case was a total disaster. Her whole life, Miss Cayce had thought her father was dead. But shockingly, years later, someone else was claiming to be her father. Considering she would clock 30 soon, this must have been traumatizing for everyone involved.
Miss Casey, you say that for more than 25 years, your mother has told you that a deceased man who is listed on your birth certificate is your biological father.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now another man, Mr. Edwards, is claiming he is your biological father.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ripping off the Band-Aid was the only way to describe this. Miss Casey's mom had constantly told her daughter that her dad had been murdered, and so the only dad she knew was dead. However, Mr. Edward thought differently, and he had good reason to think so. In the meantime, Growing up without a dad had been sad for Ms. Cayce.
Ms. Ewing, you say you are sure Mr. Edwards is not your daughter's father. In fact, you say you are 100% certain that a man named Portis-Hawkins, who you claim was shot and killed, is in fact your daughter's biological father.
Yes, Your Honor.
Hidden phantom relationships and painful childhood memories. Ms. Cayce had ensured that her own kids didn't deal with what she had to go through growing up fatherless. Her mom apparently wasn't aware of her struggles, but Ms. Cayce wasn't about to believe that assertion either.
I built a bond with Portis-Hawkins, who's on my birth certificate, even though he's not ever been in my life. I do not know what the man looks like. I don't have a picture of him. I don't have anything about him, but he is on my birth certificate. My oldest daughter I passed Hawkins on to her. So I pretty much raised my kids the way that I have never been raised. I make sure that the mother and the father is in the home.
Ms. Cayce's mom had found out about her baby daddy's demise when her daughter was still quite young. With his apparent cause of death being by a family member, she was not about to traumatize her very young daughter at the time with such news. She does admit she had been having sneaky links with Mr. Edwards at the time, and years later, Mr. Edwards had begun to nurse the idea that Ms. Cayce was his daughter. It would appear that Mr. Edwards' child would agree with the notion that she might be his too. Why?
It was kind of rough. It was real hard on me.
Ms. Ewing, what have you told Ms. Cayce about Mr. Hawkins and your relationship?
I called his cousin to see did she want to spend time with LaConda, and she informed me then that he had been shot in the head by his brother and he was deceased. LaConda was 7 years old.
In an interesting turn of events, Mr. Edwards' daughter was also Ms. Cayce's sister through her mom. Considering he had not been Father of the Year with her big sister, he had resorted to more modern means to reach out to her to make some bold assertions.
Like, she's certain that I was her sister.
So to be clear, Mr. Edwards is your older sister's father?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Mr. Edwards, you weren't in your daughter's life or Miss Cayce's life, am I correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Mr. Edward had recently suffered loss in the family, and that may have been a catalyst to his decision to search for his other kids. He also believed Ms. Cayce shared an uncanny family resemblance, and this was why he believed so strongly she was his kid.
I felt like this. We lost one boy. We ain't losing this one. I'm not losing you.
Why are you so convinced that you're her father?
I don't even understand how I can tell. It's like the hair stands up on my back. She looks so much like my family. She's got everything that my mom had, you know, what my mom looked like.
Interestingly, Ms. Cayce's big sister had slipped the idea that she was Mr. Edwards' kid by highlighting that their mother had not been particularly honest while dealing with them. However, Ms. Cayce didn't share the intuitive conviction Mr. Edwards was feeling. How was she supposed to feel anyway?
They look very similar, you're saying?
Yes, ma'am, they look.
And so at some point, you hear from Mr. Edwards.
Yes, Your Honor.
You go meet him. What's going through your mind?
I did not have a bond with him. Me and my older sister had a conversation about my mother, and she was like, well, what if he is your father, since mother lied to us for so many years about different things?
Desperate for any sort of paternal connection, Ms. Cayce had looked for the person's name signed on her birth certificate as her father as soon as she became an adult. She wanted to know why he left her. She had so much to ask and certain things to say. Her mom makes an attempt to clarify one important question with a factual answer.
Miss Cayce, let me ask you something. All these years, you've had Portis-Hawkins on your birth certificate.
Yes, Your Honor. Eventually, when I got over the age of 18, me and my husband sat down and we did a research. I got on a social network and I found Portis-Hawkins.
This case was getting stranger by the second. The characters who were supposed to be dead were coming back to life, and the judge may or may not have been very involved in this very shocking turn of events. No one saw this coming.
Well, I have took a lot of blame for that.
Well, you need to stop feeling like that. He left me. I left him.
You were an innocent child.
You was a child. You had nothing to do with it.
Miss Cayce, all this time, you really have been torn.
Yes, ma'am. I don't believe any child in this world should grow up without a parent. Whether it's the mother or the father, I don't believe any child should have to go through that.
Everyone in the courtroom is outrightly losing their minds, and for good reason too. Miss Cayce's birth father was not so dead and was walking to the witness box. Everyone was in awe, especially Miss Cayce and her mom.
Miss Cayce.
Yes, ma'am.
You've been told for over 25 years that Portis-Hawkins, the man you believe to be your father, was dead.
Yes, ma'am.
But he's alive. And we found him for you. Jerome, please escort.
A surprise guest walks into the witness box with an almost 30-year-old keepsake in tow. The waterworks wouldn't stop coming forth for Ms. Cayce, and she kept talking about everything to her dad, who had just walked in. It was a heart-moving moment for all involved. Mr. Hawkins explains to the court how he lost contact with his daughter.
You okay?
We go up to the witness stand.
Oh my God, LaConda, there's your dad! Dad! Oh my God, that is me. Let me see. Oh, I got
That's
this picture.
you.
My sister lost it. I have this picture. Look at you, baby. This is the picture I had. My teddy bear, my best. I love that bunny. Mr. Snuggles was his name. I used to always take that bunny with me everywhere I go.
Having lost so many years apart, Mr. Hawkins was totally psyched about sharing his story and where he had been, but soon thereafter, it was time. The verdict and truth as to which of the two men might have sired Ms. Cayce had to be determined, and it wasn't who anyone was expecting.
Mr. Edwards, you are not her father. Mr. Hawkins, you are not her father.
LaConda, in my heart, you still my child.
I know you did.
Ms. Ewan, do you know who her father is?
Yeah, I do.
And it's
His brother.
Mr. Hawkins' brother?
Whoa! Didn't see that coming.
The heart of the facts of this case was like a unicorn sighting. This time around, the father was suing to prove he was the father of the child. Even if the mother had asserted differently, Mr. Brooks was certain Ms. Gooley's son was his son as well, and he might have had a good reason for thinking so.
Mr. Brooks, you've summoned your ex-girlfriend, Ms. Gooley, to paternity court to prove that you are the father of her 18-year-old son, Mr. McDonald.
Yes, Your Honor.
Ms. Gooley, you admit you cheated on Mr. Brooks all those years ago and are here today to prove to Mr. Brooks that he is not the father of your son.
Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. Brooks and Ms. Gooley were together for over a decade, and it wasn't the most faithful relationship in the books. Even though Ms. Gooley felt otherwise, she didn't tell Mr. Brooks that he may not be the father of her baby throughout her pregnancy. Preposterous as this was, why didn't she continue with the facade? What changed her mind to speak her truth?
And that ran, I knew he was my son from day one.
You were in a relationship with her at the time?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Gooley,
Yes, ma'am.
how long was that relationship?
10 years.
Was it a committed relationship?
No, Your Honor.
It was not?
No.
Did
You're
you
lying.
consider yourselves boyfriend and girlfriend?
I mean, yeah,
Yes.
we were boyfriend and girlfriend, but I mean, I wasn't faithful.
During the pregnancy, did you ever tell Mr. Brooks that he may not be
No,
the
ma'am.
biological father?
No, Your Honor, I didn't.
A very sentimental Mr. Brooks present keepsakes he's had for almost 2 decades. In an interesting turn of events, it turns out Ms. Gooley and Mr. Brooks strongly suspected each other of snitching on each other to federal authorities. Interestingly, Ms. Gooley makes some powerful allegations concerning her son's legitimacy.
When she told you she was pregnant, there was no doubt in your mind that you were the father?
No, it was one of the greatest days of my life when she told me she was pregnant. And I just wanted to be a great father. And I got pictures.
Let me see those pictures, please, sir. Jerome,
I've been having these pictures with me for 17 years. She don't have none. Matter of fact, I got about 60 pictures, and she's not in none of them.
Accusations of cowardice and denial are fired in court. Mr. Brooks details when last he saw his son, and Ms. Gooley tells the court some really nasty thoughts on his ability to have kids. It may seem as though she had high praises for Mr. Brooks' parenting skills either way.
DNA test, because he is not the
did
dad.
everything. I did the paperwork myself. I went and paid for it. The
Okay,
court
well,
kept
why is
giving me
he
the
not
runaround.
legitimized?
The day they came and got him, this is the day I took the picture. This is the last day.
So this is a picture of the exact day your son was taken from you?
Yep, January 23rd. And she wasn't nowhere to be found. She'd been gone for like 3 days.
I was in jail, Your Honor.
Taking things up a notch, the judge ushers in Mr. McDonald's, the child whose paternity is in question, and it turns out that despite several attempts to prove otherwise, he firmly believed in his relationship with Mr. Brooks. Mr. Brooks was standing 10 toes behind him as well, it would seem. However, if it turned out Mr. Brooks was not his dad, he was going to find his dad.
Thank you for joining us today, Mr. McDonald.
Pleasure.
I want to ask you a few questions.
Yes, ma'am.
And you can just tell the truth to me. That's all I need to know. I want to know, first, Mr. Brooks states that he believes he's your biological father.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you believe Mr. Brooks is your father?
Yes, ma'am.
You do. That's been your understanding your whole life?
Yes, ma'am.
The judge examines Ms. Gooley again about the possibility of Mr. Brooks being her baby father, but she does not see even the slightest possibility of it being true. She also questions his dedication as a parent in Mr. McDonald's life. She clearly thinks he's a hypocrite. Not to be outdone, Mr. Brooks has a fierce rebuttal in place, and he's not about to allow anyone to malign his role as a dad. The judge calls the bickering parties to order and sets Ms. Gooley straight.
Mr. McDonald, your son's biological father?
I don't see how he can be.
You don't see how Mr. Brooks can be?
No, ma'am.
Why is he not even a possibility in your mind? If you were intimate with him?
we were together for so long and I never got pregnant before. I don't
God
understand.
said one time.
You know, and he's up here like he wants to be this great father and everything. He ain't done nothing for Demarion since Demarion's been back in our life.
Surprisingly, or perhaps not so much, Ms. Gooley starts an argument with Mr. Brooks again on Parenting 101, and the judge shuts it down. Mr. Brooks' enthusiasm about being Mr. McDonald's father had rubbed off on everyone, and it looked like the court gallery was definitely rooting for him. Mr. McDonald expresses his wish to meet his real dad, and on that note, the judge declares the results. Was it a happy ending for Mr. Brooks? Let's see.
Mr. Brooks, you are his father.
All right! Thank you.
How's it feel?
Great.
Look at my boy. This is my boy.
Feels good, sir?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. You feel real good.
This case came with all of the messy details. The case of Portis versus Middlebrooks had the court's gallery on its tiptoes. Mr. Portis was denying being the father of Ms. Middlebrooks' child, Ava. They had been embattled for 2 years, and both parties of the case were not ready to back down in their quest for the truth.
Mr. Portis, you and your mother have petitioned the court for a DNA test because you are certain you are not the father of the defendant's daughter, Ava.
Correct,
You
Your
say your life has been ruined and need today's paternity results to set the record straight. Is that correct?
Correct, Your Honor.
Mr. Portis takes the audience on a time machine back to how this battle started. One missed court date in a child support suit had set the ball rolling, and he'd been trying his best to salvage the situation he already botched by getting paternity test. But everything had proven unsuccessful, with things refusing to move the way he planned, including Ms. Middlebrooks.
If she was mine or not, we never took a DNA test. We tried to, but it didn't go through.
Don't you have to get a DNA before you can be put on child support?
We went
You
together.
didn't show up to court twice.
It was once.
So hold on. You paying child support for this baby?
Yes. Thousands of dollars.
But you say you've never had a DNA test.
No.
And that's because you had a court date.
And he missed. He
And you
missed the
missed
court date.
So you were named
And
the
they
father by
established
default.
paternity. Yes.
Yep.
That's how it worked.
Yep.
Yes.
Cute.
True.
But after that happened, we had tried to get it all situated out by trying to get 2 tests done with this court.
What started as a talking stage for the both parties had ended up in a very bitter paternity child support battle in court. Why did everything go wrong? Was it an unexpected pregnancy in the nearest future that estranged the couple, or could it have been something even more scandalous?
Were you boyfriend and girlfriend?
We started talking first and then eventually started dating. It happened fast.
At what point did you find out you were pregnant?
A few months later.
But when she got pregnant, we stopped talking. So like we weren't talking at the time that she got pregnant. Like we weren't talking. But when after the fact that she got pregnant, she had hit me up and was like, "Hey, I'm pregnant and be prepared for child support."
We were definitely
and all this
together.
other
We were
stuff.
definitely together.
No,
I
we
called you after I got the text.
No, we weren't, because I found out that she had another boyfriend.
Ms. Middlebrooks had a different opinion from Mr. Portis on who the strange man in her life was. Interestingly, she also had a different opinion on the timeline of her pregnancy and relationship. Could this duo be any more incompatible?
The way you all broke up, then you started dating Mr. Portis.
Yes.
How soon after you and Mr. Portis started dating did you find out you were pregnant?
A month or two later.
A month?
A month or two.
Your Honor, I took her to the hospital. She found out she was like a month pregnant. The other guy that they talking about, a letter did go out to him and she told him that she was pregnant and he's not the father.
Ms. Middlebrooks and Mr. Portis lose their decorum, queuing in a lot of choice word salads and unnecessary bickering. At this point, everyone's patience has been stretched thin trying to handle the parties to the case. The judge makes use of her gavel.
When was there a
relationship. I mean, when were they?
Did I have intercourse with you? Were I with you? No, I didn't think so. Wasn't nobody talking to you.
So I'm talking to you.
Well, I ain't talking to you.
But as a grown woman,
hold on,
ladies.
Ladies,
I'm not talking
That's
to
why
you
we
right now.
don't. That's why we don't talk to you. So we don't like you, bro.
Ladies, Mr. Portis, tell me how you found out Ms. Middlebrooks was pregnant.
She had told me.
What was your response?
I didn't really believe her at first, honestly.
Why do you think she'd lie?
I don't know.
Unfold your arms.
I don't know, Your Honor.
Back on track, the judge cuts the tension in the courtroom with some words admonishing the parties for uncouth behavior. Mr. Portis reveals to the court why he was absent on the day Ms. Middlebrooks was in the labor room, and it might have been for good reason. Let's see what they both had to say.
Ms. Middlebrooks?
Disrespectful.
I realize that you may not agree with Ms. Trent, but you have to understand that when you are dealing with someone who's your elder, right or wrong, just keep your mouth shut.
That doesn't give her.
Hold on. I am going to be very clear. I have not heard her speak badly about you, and if she does, I will correct her as well. You all can disagree on the points, but let's not go there. You're a young girl with a beautiful new baby, and we're here to support that baby.
To get even better clarity, the judge introduces a third-party witness in the case to give some much-needed answers to the questions burning a hole in this case. Who had Ms. Portis initially said was the dad? How did he come to be the one paying child support? Ms. Middlebrooks and Mr. Portis's mom get into another nasty row over missed appointment dates.
Ms. Middlebrooks, I want to come to you, to your aunt. When your niece found out she was pregnant,
yes.
Who did she tell you the father was?
At the time, the only person I knew was the ex.
No, I didn't ask that. That's not what I asked. Who did she say the father was?
She said the ex.
Okay, I already knew that.
Son.
I said the ex.
But I thought it was my son all along.
No, hold on.
Now you really
Hold on.
like that?
I could tell by the way you were telling that story.
The judge schools Mr. Portis on the cost of his recklessness and the very huge consequences of that decision to miss court dates. The Laches principal wasn't going to absolve him of parental responsibility, even if the DNA test proved he wasn't the father. This was a very hard pill that needed to be swallowed. Let's see how he handled that.
One run.
Me not being experienced,
work for one
me not
day?
being experienced with court and everything like that.
I was telling my
I didn't
son
know that
to
I was
go
going to be
to
defaulted
court,
as the dad if I
'cause
didn't
that
go.
was what was
I was
gonna
in training.
happen.
I was in training for management, and I didn't know that, like, you know what I'm saying, if I was to miss court, it was going to be this big of a situation.
Oh, yes.
Now I know.
Yes.
But I was inexperienced with all this stuff that was going on at the time.
This is exactly why I tell people you making babies, you got to understand
Correct.
the system.
Yeah.
It was time to read the verdict. Invisible drum roll could be heard building anticipation for what was to come. The judge announces the results of the DNA tests, and it looks like Ms. Middlebrooks may have known what she was talking about after all, or did she? Only baby Ava had a happy ending. At least she would know who her dad was now.
Mr. Portis, you are the father. You are Ava's father.
Thank you, Your Honor.
That is your beautiful little girl.
Appreciate it.
What do you feel, Miss Middlebrooks? Can you tell me?
She knows. Now she knows.
And that's a relief for you.
That's a relief.
When I said 1 to 2 months is too close for comfort, I saw your face and your body language. You nodded in agreement. I think you knew that there was reason to doubt.